for many reasons. In particular, my own personal views. I'm a Christian. I'm not ashamed of it. And Christianity brought to the world things that we all take for granted. Tom Holland, who actually was educated here and is one of the great classicists and taught himself ancient Greek, he wrote in his book Dominion that even if you hate Christianity, your critique of Christianity is actually using Christianity itself. And so this idea of intellectual diversity, I totally support that. And I think that students should read different books and should read different authors. At some point, though, the purpose of education is not to have an endless buffet line for students to sample every bad idea in the world. It's to point them to the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I think we've lost what the purpose of education is. Education in Latin literally means to lead forth. To lead forth out of the cave was the original analogy. And so at Turning Point Academy, we take the biblical idea to train a child up in the ways in which they will go, and we make no apologies for instituting a belief that believing in God is better than secularism. The defense of universal human equality is a good for all humanity, amongst many other things that you articulated.
So how would you reconcile the importance of freedom, which is listed as Turning Point USA's mission on your website, with the restrictions on bodily autonomy, which you support, including abortion, trans-affirming healthcare, and birth control? And how would you respond to criticism of your limited view of freedom?
Sure. So first of all, birth control I don't have that strong of views of. So I mean, except for the fact that I've criticized how actually young women that take hormonal birth control might have side effects that are not always disclosed to them. As far as abortion and trans-affirming care, I'll get into that in a second, but I find it laughable, not from you, of course, but some of the people that are always very critical of, Charlie, why don't you just believe in bodily autonomy? I'm sorry, didn't you just mandate a vaccine for the last couple of years? I couldn't visit your country for 2 years because I didn't take a vaccine. So it's my body, my choice, unless so it's my body, my choice if it's another human being in the womb, but it's not my body, my choice if I want to take a vaccine. That was neither safe nor effective. And we all must be very honest about the fact that the public health experts of both of our countries never apologized for the fact that they made you take a vaccine that, by the way, has a lot of side effects for a lot of people in this room, and no one wants to say that. As a side note, though, all the bodily autonomy people, you guys can laugh all you want, it's fine. All the bodily autonomy people suddenly got really silent when we decided to say, we're going to control your body and control the movement of what you can do. You can't go to the pub. You can't go to the local gathering of friends. You can't go to university. You can't even go into the UK if you don't have a card. So that's a fun contradiction for me. At the same time, there's a difference between freedom or liberty and license. Liberty is the pursuit of things that allow human beings to flourish at its highest possible potential. License is not those things. So in the first thing, you do not have a ability, and I'm sure there will be a question about this, under any agreed upon Western morality, which is derived from a Christian construct, to murder another human being. You do not have that freedom. And so we believe, obviously, because we believe in very basic biology and science, that life begins at conception, and therefore that life deserves universal human rights as applied equally under our laws. As far as trans-affirming care, as far as if you want to do something over the age of 18, knock yourself out. You guys actually have been better than our country on this. You have the Cass report that our country has lost its mind, where the Cass report itself issued an opinion based on my limited but somewhat understanding of it, that trans-affirming care for children is highly questionable at best. And so we all can agree that students that are not, or young people that are not yet of age or mature age of 18, of course we limit certain freedoms or licenses or liberties for 15-year-olds. In my country, they can't own guns till they're 18. In my country, they can't even drink till they're 21. In my country, they can't vote until they're 18 in America. And so until someone is of age, you're going to limit that. And so I believe that we should all agree that young people in particular, 15, 16, 17, there should be a prohibition that you should not be able to cut off your breasts or go under life-altering, irreversible, gender-affirming care just because you might be going through a temporary phase.
So you spoke about vaccines and the COVID-19 vaccine. How would you respond to accusations about you misusing your platform and purporting misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic, including speaking against the COVID vaccine and speculating about deaths caused by it, and being briefly banned from Twitter for claiming that hydroxychloroquine was 100% effective in treating the virus?
Well, I'm back on Twitter now, thankfully. New ownership. I appreciate the question. Has anyone asked our public health leaders that question? Will they apologize for everything they got wrong? The lockdowns were completely unnecessary. They should never have happened. And the young people of the West lost proms, graduation, whatever equivalent you have here in the UK, for no good reason whatsoever. And you guys can laugh all you want, but let's look at the data. Suicide rates of young people in the West went up after COVID. There's speech delays. There's a misery problem. And we locked down the generation of people that needed to be locked down the least, that have now bared the consequences the most, on top of a hyperinflation crisis, which caused a housing crisis, which has caused a sovereign debt crisis. All for what? Because we were worried that something that materially was never a greater threat than the seasonal flu to these people in this room it was never a greater threat than the seasonal flu. That is a fact of science, because we have to trust the science. And again, we can go back and forth, but this is the more important thing. It was never about trusting the science. It was about trusting the scientists that confirm this view. There is something called the Barrington Declaration. If you don't know what this is, all of you have a moral obligation to know what it is. The Barrington Declaration was thousands of scientists from around the world that said these lockdowns are doing more harm than good. And the one thing that we never talked about through all of this, that now the pharma companies magically discovered after they were able to proliferate a vaccine, is early interventions. Is the fact that if you catch COVID early, what is your vitamin D level? Let's have a serious conversation about whether or not you're chronically overweight. In my country, we are a fat country. We're good at a lot of things. We're also really good at gaining weight. Why didn't we also say to the American people, and be honest, if you are 50 pounds overweight, you have a much higher likelihood of dying of COVID. Well, that would be considered to be politically insensitive in America. So how do I respond to critics? Honestly, I'm proud of the work that we did during COVID. I opposed the lockdowns from the beginning. We talked about early interventions. We platformed people that were right all along. And meanwhile, the people that got the most important public policy questions of our time wrong have never felt any sort of criticism. They've never actually faced justice. And I think we, the people of the West, deserve an apology from our leaders for all the suffering that they inflicted on the young people of both our countries.
So you've described recently how it used to be 10 vaccines, now it's 72 shots for our babies. Something's not right and our kids are sicker than ever. How would you respond to criticism that your rhetoric regarding vaccinations is dangerous and irresponsible when considering a global rise in vaccine distrust and deaths from vaccine-preventable diseases, including measles and meningitis?
Well, first of all, number one, you can use your own agency and you can get 9 COVID shots if you want. I'm not preventing that. I think, though, that a robust conversation needs to happen that inoculations have risen across America. I'll just talk about America. I know this for certain. Inoculation and vaccine rates have risen, and chronic diseases are higher than ever. And there is a perplexing rise in a lot of the secondary and third-tier issues. Of course, I'm pro-vaccine. If you want to get vaccines, we should do it prudently, we should do it appropriately, we should do it smartly. But in the same way, we should also simultaneously respect medical freedom and religious conscience. The criticism is this. I'm not a scientist and I don't play one on TV, but I use human reason and one would say common sense to also ask the very simple question. The public health authorities got almost every major problem of every question of COVID wrong. Why should we continue to delegate trust to them? Trust is earned, it is not given. And so, yeah, look, I'm sure someone's going to ask a question or two about that. That's fine. I'm by no means a quote unquote expert on all that. But let me also question this. The experts, they have to now, number one, you have to apologize when you get something really wrong. And I think you have to get back into the public square and prove to us why we should trust you when, for example, in my country, I'm not sure if it was for you guys, we had this thing of 6 feet to slow the spread. Anthony Fauci just made it up. The data shows that he just arbitrarily made it up. There is not a single public health reason why we had 6 feet to slow the spread. Locking down schools. Actually, what made COVID worse and delayed the inevitable spread. The only country in Europe that I think was a model was Sweden. They kept schools open, they kept restaurants open, they leaned into herd immunity, and generally their statistics were way better than some of the other countries that were correlated to it. So everyone has the agency to do what they want to see fit. And yes, I do think that there is something troubling when the childhood vaccination schedule goes from 10 shots to 72 shots, some of which are things, for example, hepatitis B. Upon birth in America, I don't know how it is in the UK, within seconds, they will inoculate a child against hepatitis B. Number one, hepatitis B vaccine expires by the age of 13, and there's only 2 ways to get hepatitis B, through sexual intercourse or through intravenous drugs or some other correlated way. So unless it is a son or a daughter of an active drug user or a drug mom, totally get it, which you can test for in utero, the argument for hepatitis B vaccine within seconds of a baby being born is, I think, questionable at best. And so those of us that even ask the question, why are we using a hepatitis B vaccine when we could maybe wait till they're 12 or 13 and when they're sexually active? No, you must do it and you must just trust the science. Okay, well, that's not good enough for us.
So Turning Point USA acquired Students for Trump in 2019 and worked on targeting students on college campuses, especially ahead of the 2020 election. However, despite an increase in youth turnout in 2020, Trump support was worse with young people in several battleground states than 2016. How would you respond to critics who claim that this failure was partly due to Trump outsourcing youth outreach to Turning Point USA?
How did he do this last election?
Well, I mean, his support was better in youth, but it was still lower lower amongst youth than the Democrat support was.
We won the youth vote in the state of Michigan, and we ran basically the entire youth operation in 2024. In fact, anyone can look on ChatGPT, Grok, or Google. I mean, whatever you want, we crushed the youth vote. Even Democrats acknowledge it. There's story after story after story. Why are young people moving so far to the right? And so, will you give me credit for that?
I mean, why do you think that, in several key states, even in 2024, amongst the young people,
we did anywhere between 10 to 25 points better in the key battleground states. This is not just conjecture, it is material fact. Both young men and young women moved to the right dramatically. In America, young people are Donald Trump's most loyal cohort, not even baby boomers. According to the Yale Youth Poll and the Harvard Youth Poll, Donald Trump has actually made the most gains amongst younger voters. And I guess maybe something we did had something to do with that.
And what do you see as the future of conservatism amongst young people?
I think it's going to be the dominant, God willing, dominant worldview amongst young people in America, and it's ascendant. Again, what we are seeing in the States, and I don't know if it's the case here in the UK, young men in particular are on pace to be the most conservative generation in history, and it's an exciting trend, and we're leaning into it. We see this in the macro trends. We also see this micro. Young women are following suit. There's kind of two Gen Zs. There's Gen Z that was basically out of college or near end of college at COVID, and then there was Gen Z that was in high school. What would the equivalent term here be in high school? Whatever you call. Yeah. Okay. And they had their lives obliterated. Those are the most formative times of their life, 15, 16, 17, 18. They were forced to wear masks. They had to do school through Zoom. They saw friends that, many of whom that took their life, our suicide rates went up exponentially. And also, on top of that, we had this insane race stuff in America during 2020, otherwise known as Floydapalooza, where we decided to burn our country because a guy drug overdosed on the streets of Minneapolis. And that's true, he did drug overdose, not just my opinion. Just read the medical examiner report, the Hennepin County medical examiner report. And so then all of a sudden we decided to commit cultural suicide and throw statues. By the way, in London, they threw a statue into the river or something because we're systemically racist. I'm sorry, our two countries are the two least racist countries ever to exist in the history of the world. And you guys should also be thanking the Lord that you have someone like William Wilberforce to look up to, and you should be building statues to Wilberforce, not taking down statues of your history, because it's thanks to Western values that we abolish slavery, and the world is a profoundly better place because of that worldview, and we as conservatives are unafraid to tell that story and that truth.
So you've condemned the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as a huge mistake.
Correct.
Why do you believe it was a mistake to pass anti-discrimination legislation? And what do you think would be better policy for being treated fairly and equally, which you see as an American principle?
Yeah, nothing against the intent, but it was too broadly written, and it played into something called disparate impact. Disparate impact was woven within the Civil Rights Act, and disparate impact basically says if two racial groups have different outcomes, the answer must be racism. It does not allow any legal nuance. So there are four components to, quote unquote, the anti-racist regime of America. I don't pretend to know what goes on in this country. I could just talk about America. I'm sure that's fine. And it's four components: affirmative action, critical race theory, DEI, and disparate impact. Those are the kind of the four components. All of them have their subsection. The Civil Rights Act led the way to affirmative action, which is weaponized, quote unquote, reverse racism against Asian and white people. And the Civil Rights Act also blazed the trail for disparate impact as a legal theory, basically saying that if Black Americans are doing worse in a group, it might not be because of marital differences or cultural differences or single motherhood issues. It must be racism. And so because of that, the Civil Rights Act was too broadly written. It's now being applied in my country as a way to get rid of voter integrity, to get rid of election integrity, get rid of voter ID. The Civil Rights Act is also now being applied to put men in female locker rooms. So the intent, it should have been a single page or a two-page bill to say that you cannot discriminate against based on the color of somebody's skin, period, end of story. Instead, we get a multiple 100-page bill with lots of chapters and lots of lesser-known amendments that created basically a permanent anti-racist bureaucracy within our federal government to go find racism where it doesn't exist and create it in new places where it otherwise did not exist.
So you've described Martin Luther King Jr. as awful, not a good person, even though many conservative commentators have spoken in support of what he says, including his quote, where they will be judged about his children, where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Statement. He was right there.
So does his speech and his general ethos not then agree with your views on DEI?
No, I've complimented him as well, but I mean, first of all, he was a personally morally flawed man. And to be fair, a lot of people I sometimes look up to are morally flawed. But also, I mean, we're all morally flawed. We're all sinners. I would hope actually, many of you probably don't believe in God, so never mind. Look, Martin Luther King, in a lot of different ways, had a promise of a colorblind America. I don't want to go too deep into this, because I don't know how, maybe it's very interesting to UK students about MLK, but there is a mythology around MLK that does not warrant the reverence that he gets treated with in America. Should he be mentioned amongst lots of people in the 20th century that was complicated and at the end of his life advocated for a more communistic view and then actually got away from race blindness and actually got towards race obsession? I'm totally cool with that. He did some great things. He did some things that were not so great. In America, though, you must understand, he is looked to as the new founding father. The main contention that I have with the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement and how it ended, not how it started, is that we refounded the country fundamentally. We cast aside our founding roots and our founding documents, the US Constitution, and we decided to basically usher in the Civil Rights Act as a new anti-racist dogma, creed, and I find something fundamentally wrong with that. Our birth certificate as Americans is the Declaration, and the law of the land is tied with the US Constitution. It was not the Civil Rights Act. And so with all of that to say, we have a national holiday to MLK. We got rid of a national holiday for our first president and our founding father, George Washington. We used to call it Washington's birthday. Now we call it President's Day in our country. So that's just maybe some context to answer that question.
So you tweeted ahead of the January 6th Capitol attack that Turning Point USA and Students for Trump were sending more than 80 buses of patriots to DC to fight for this president, although it ended up being 7. Do you see your claims, including that the election was stolen, as contributing to January the 6th?
I mean, it's somewhat of an irrelevant question, but no, of course not. In fact, our students were the ones that didn't even go to the Capitol and peacefully went home. But I mean, how deep into January 6th do you want to get? It wasn't an insurrection by any means whatsoever. There were some people that acted totally improperly, and they should not assault police officers or break windows. But there were also a lot of people that walked into the Capitol building and the doors were open for them, and they walked between the queued lines that were there and said a prayer. And these are the people that walk around with pocket constitutions, and they were smeared in the largest witch hunt and manhunt, I should say, the largest manhunt in American law enforcement history that resulted in 1,300 arrests of non-violent offenders that walked into the People's House in the United States Capitol building, while violent crime rose in almost every major city in the country. And so I don't know how much, maybe I'm sure there'll be a question on January 6th. So.
You've compared same-sex sexual behavior to drug and alcohol use and described it as an error and said you don't agree with the lifestyle. How would you justify these comments whilst also speaking about welcoming gay people into the conservative movement?
Well, first, we all have flaws. That's number one. But number two, how do I justify? It doesn't matter what Charlie Kirk believes. That's a view derived from Scripture. And so the Bible talks very clearly about God's natural order. We see this reflected in the natural law. Some of my closest friends and closest people that work with me alongside Turning Point USA participate in a same-sex lifestyle, and that's their own prerogative. But if you ask me what I believe and why I believe it, it's derived straight from Scripture.
And you've spoken of marriage as between one man and one woman, even whilst polls have consistently shown most Americans as in support of same-sex marriage. How would you respond to critics regarding your position on this?
I don't derive my morality from up or down vote.
How would you respond to criticism that far-right-wing discourse, particularly online, is inflamed by organizations such as Turning Point USA and your rhetoric, even as you condemn attendance of neo-Nazis at your events?
I don't even know how to respond to that. I mean, how do I respond to critics that I'm inflaming tensions? If the truth inflames you, you have a problem. It's not my problem.
What do you see as the role of an institution such as Turning Point USA in shaping national discourse? And what do you think is next for the organization in terms of what you discuss?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're very known for hopefully what we'll see here, which is respectful dialogue. We have an open mic on campuses. I did over 100 hours of campus debates this semester, seen billions of times around the world. And Yeah, look, as far as conservatism, we plan to win. And for the 3 conservatives that are here tonight, I hope you guys get your mojo back. This was once a great country. I want to see it great again. You guys are a husk of your former self. You guys, you can laugh and sneer all you want, but the country that split the atom and invented the steam engine and eradicated slavery and brought common law to the world can do a lot better than this. And your existence led to our existence. And for whatever I can do, I hope that this country finds a leader or a group of leaders. I'm not here to give you political advice. I hate when foreigners do that to Americans. You guys do whatever you want. But I do have a wish that the world feels like it's missing something. It feels like it's missing something when Great Britain or England, or whatever politically correct thing I have to say, because I guess England, I can't fly an English flag now, or whatever nonsense that is. Like, be proud of your heritage. You've done good for the world. Stop apologizing. Get your energy, get your vitality, get what made England and made Great Britain such a phenomenal place. I hope you get that back, and I hope that you reject the swan song of multiculturalism and get back to the fundamental truism that a strong Britain means a strong world, and therefore a strong West, and we can stand up for what is good, true, and beautiful.
Would you agree with commentators that your politics have become more conservative in recent years, and what's caused this shift?
Yes. Partially, honestly, getting married and having children, something that I hope all of you do. Getting married and having children is an objective good thing for yourself and for society, and for, of course, your children. The fact that we're having less children in the West is a very alarming trend. And as I got more conservative, as I got married and I started to have a couple kids, I started to realize this is what I'm fighting for. And I understand the threats against their well-being and their livelihood. And then also I got more serious about my faith.
So you've spoken today against affirmative action in educational institutions. How would you propose making excellence in education more equitable for students from disadvantaged backgrounds?
IQ tests.
And do you see equal treatment as possible without considering...
No, just so we're clear, IQ tests don't have anything to do with background. I mean, meaning like, okay, if you have somewhat of an equal nutritional capacity, it doesn't matter how much you study or you get an IQ, maybe you can get an IQ tutor and boost it by a couple points, but we should bring back IQ tests in the West. Please continue.
I was just going to say, do you see it as possible without considering any external factors for students when applying for higher education, such as economic background?
Well, external factors can be factored in, but affirmative action isn't that. At least in America, I don't know how it works here. Affirmative action in America is, we struck it down at the Supreme Court, thankfully, race-based, which is that a certain melanin content gets you certain points, and a certain melanin content gets you demerits.
Great. We're going to move now to...
Okay. Am I stand here?
Yeah,
okay, great.
At the dispatch.
Thank you.